"I don't have much, but you need this more than I do," Chloe Johnson whispered, her voice barely above the morning breeze as she held the last slice of bread in her hands. The alley smelled of damp concrete and faint exhaust from passing cars, the early sunlight catching the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Across the narrow street, a young boy sat on a cardboard square, knees pulled to his chest, eyes wide and fixed on Chloe, reflecting a hunger that went beyond food. She stepped closer, her worn sneakers scuffing the cracked pavement, and extended her hands, offering him the bread. The boy hesitated, glancing around at the empty alley, the silence heavy with expectation, before reaching out to accept it, his fingers brushing hers in a fleeting, human connection that felt monumental in that moment. Chloe smiled softly, a small warmth spreading through her chest as she watched him nibble, tiny crumbs falling to the ground and sticking to the damp cracks of concrete. The city around them carried on. Oblivious, a bus roared past, honking, the wheels spraying slush from puddles in the gutter, but Chloe remained still for a heartbeat, her eyes on the boy's small, determined hands. Behind her, the fire escape's metal rungs glinted coldly in the sunlight, and she could feel the pull of the day, errands to run, a shift to start at the diner where she worked for barely enough to cover rent. Yet none of that mattered. For a single moment, the world had shrunk to two people, one small act, and a bond neither had asked for, but both understood. She turned, shoulders straightening, and began the walk home, the wind tugging at her faded hoodie, and for the first time that week, the chill in her stomach eased slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Chloe passed the corner bodega, its windows fogged from the morning heat and the smell of coffee beans, and a man across the street glanced up from his newspaper, eyebrows raised at the sight of her pause to give a gentle wave to the boy as he ran off down the alley. She kept walking, letting the streets and the distant hum of traffic fade behind her, feeling a soft ripple of satisfaction at the thought that one small choice could mean so much. Upstairs in her cramped apartment, the thin curtains swayed as she placed the loaf she had saved onto the counter, the sun hitting the worn tiles and casting long shadows that stretched toward her like quiet witnesses. She leaned against the counter, hands resting on the cool surface, listening to the city waking up below, her mind replaying the brief, grateful smile of the boy, the slight twitch of his shoulders as he disappeared into the morning light. Outside, a motorcade of black SUVs turned the corner several blocks away, polished chrome catching the sun, the sound of engines growing louder with each second, a silent pulse that Chloe could not yet see but would soon feel, the air thickening with the sense that the day held more in store than she could imagine, and somewhere in the distance, a driver slowed, then stopped, the city holding its breath, waiting, the moment stretching taut with possibilities and promises that Chloe had only just begun to touch. Chloe Johnson stood frozen at her apartment door, the sound of engines fading behind her as her heart raced and her mind tried to comprehend what she had just witnessed. The morning sunlight bounced off the polished black SUVs and the perfectly dressed men in suits, each movement precise, deliberate, yet entirely out of place in the worn, familiar streets of her neighborhood. She could feel the vibration of the engines in the soles of her sneakers, the low hum of anticipation settling into the quiet apartment around her, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Clutching her bag tighter, she stepped inside, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under her weight, the scent of toasted bread lingering faintly from breakfast. She moved slowly to the kitchen window, peering through the cracked blinds, watching as a man in a dark suit and polished shoes stepped carefully onto the curb, carrying a thick envelope that seemed heavier than its size suggested, his gaze scanning the buildings until it found hers. A shiver ran down her spine, not from cold, but from the strange mix of curiosity and disbelief twisting in her chest. Chloe exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging as she sank onto the edge of her worn couch, the sunlight now casting long lines across the faded carpet, illuminating the small piles of schoolbooks and notebooks stacked neatly on the side table. Every detail felt heightened, every sound and shadow magnified, as if the city had slowed its pace to let her catch her breath. Outside, the boy from the alley earlier that morning ran past, waving without knowing the significance of the moment, and Chloe felt a faint smile tug at her lips, remembering the simple courage it had taken to reach out. Her mind raced with the possibilities, the ripple effects of a single choice creating waves she could not yet measure, and yet a quiet sense of responsibility anchored her in the moment, grounding her in the knowledge that even small actions could have monumental consequences. She could hear the rustle of papers from the envelope as the man adjusted his hold, the sun glinting off the thin lines of his glasses, his eyes never leaving her window. Chloe's breath caught as she realized he had seen more than just her apartment. He had seen her. Every hesitation, every careful step she had taken to blend into her surroundings, now irrelevant, as if the universe itself had conspired to spotlight this exact instant. She stood, the couch creaking under her movement, and stepped closer to the window, heart pounding, palms sweating against the worn wood of the frame. The envelope was placed on the hood of a black SUV with meticulous care, a silent offering, and the man stepped back, folding his hands, waiting, watching. Chloe's thoughts spiraled as she tried to imagine what could be inside, the possibilities endless, each one more incredible than the last. The sunlight glinted off a passing car window, catching her eye, and for a moment, time seemed suspended, stretching the seconds thin, making the world outside feel both impossibly vast and intimately close. A faint wind rustled the curtains behind her, and she felt a connection between the boy, the man, and herself, three threads tangled together by a single, unassuming act of kindness. Chloe let her hand rest lightly on the window, fingertips grazing the glass, and felt a subtle warmth radiate from her chest, a quiet confirmation that the day held something extraordinary, something she had not yet earned but was about to experience, leaving her suspended between anticipation and disbelief as the motorcade waited patiently outside, the story just beginning to unfold. Chloe Johnson took a deep breath and moved toward the door, each step deliberate, her fingers grazing the doorknob as she hesitated for a moment, the distant hum of the motorcade a constant reminder that something extraordinary was unfolding just beyond her threshold. She opened the door slowly, the sunlight spilling across the worn wooden steps, highlighting the small cracks and chipped paint that told the story of the apartment building she called home. The man in the suit stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement, and handed her the envelope with a measured calm that contrasted with the fluttering in her chest. Chloe accepted it, feeling the unexpected weight, and slowly opened it on the top step, her eyes scanning the carefully folded papers, the neat handwriting of someone who had taken the time to acknowledge her actions. A subtle warmth spread through her as she read the first lines, words of gratitude for the small act of kindness that had rippled far beyond what she had imagined, and the letter explained that her generosity had prevented a significant setback in a family project, linking back to the boy she had fed earlier in the alley. Chloe's mind raced as she pieced together the connection, the sunlight catching on the edges of the envelope and casting fleeting patterns across the cracked sidewalk. She glanced up to see the motorcade waiting, engines silent now, drivers poised, as if time itself had paused to give her a moment to absorb the impact. The boy from the alley appeared again, running up the steps with a tentative smile, his small hands clutching a folded piece of paper he had found near the edge of the street, and he handed it to Chloe, eyes wide with excitement and trust. Chloe unfolded the note, revealing a simple sketch of herself handing bread to a small child, the artistry capturing the emotion of the morning, the innocence of the boy, and the quiet determination in her own posture. And for a moment, she felt a sense of unity, a bond between them, and the unseen forces now recognizing their significance. Her gaze drifted to the street, noting the gleam of sunlight reflecting off the black SUVs, the impeccable coordination of the men in suits, and she realized that this was more than just recognition. It was an invitation into a world that had previously seemed distant, a ripple effect of her own compassion now returning in ways she had never anticipated. Chloe stood taller, the gentle breeze tugging at her hoodie, carrying the faint scent of freshly baked bread and morning dew from the street below, grounding her in the reality that her simple choice had set something extraordinary in motion. She tucked the papers carefully into her bag, her heart steadying, and looked out toward the horizon, imagining the boy running safely along the alley, imagining the ripple of influence her small action could continue to create, and the motorcade's presence seemed less intimidating now, more like a quiet acknowledgement of potential, a doorway to something larger. A world where kindness created ripples that could not be measured, but could be felt in every subtle gesture and every small connection that Chloe had fostered, leaving her poised on the edge of possibility, anticipation, and the quiet thrill of knowing that her day, and perhaps her life, had shifted in ways she had never dared to imagine. Chloe Johnson stepped carefully down the narrow stairwell, each creaking step echoing softly through the quiet building, her eyes darting to the envelope tucked securely in her bag, the weight of its contents still pressing against her ribs with an almost tangible urgency. Outside, the city hummed with life, the distant honking of cars and the chatter of pedestrians a stark contrast to the focused silence that seemed to envelope her apartment. She reached the sidewalk and paused, glancing down the street where the black SUVs had disappeared moments before, leaving only a lingering sense of anticipation and the faint hum of engines still vibrating in the air. The boy she had helped earlier ran past again, waving eagerly, his smile catching the sunlight and reflecting a pure, unspoken understanding of what had transpired, and Chloe felt a surge of warmth at the reminder that her small act had already begun to ripple outward. She walked toward the corner diner where she worked, the familiar smells of coffee and frying bacon greeting her as she pushed through the door, and the staff greeted her with their usual smiles, unaware of the extraordinary events that had touched her morning. She placed her bag down behind the counter, eyes drifting to the window as she considered the possibilities, the careful organization of the papers and the gratitude they contained swirling in her mind, each line of the letter seeming to pull her deeper into a story far larger than herself. Outside, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the uneven pavement and casting shadows that shifted like a silent audience, and Chloe felt the subtle pressure of expectation, the sense that she had stepped into a moment that demanded more than ordinary attention, more than ordinary courage. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting the warmth fill the spaces that had tightened with anxiety, and allowed her mind to map out the connections between the boy, the stranger who had delivered the envelope, and the unseen influence of her decision, the invisible threads that now linked them all. As she watched a delivery truck rumble past, the metallic scrape of its tires against the street catching her ear, she realized that this was more than a coincidence, more than luck. It was the natural consequence of compassion, a chain reaction beginning with a choice as small as sharing a piece of bread. Her gaze drifted to the alley where the boy had been, imagining him now safer, fed, his eyes bright with hope, and she understood that her morning had set in motion events that could not be undone, a quiet power emerging from the simplest gesture. The city moved around her, oblivious to the extraordinary potential in a single act of kindness, and Chloe felt a renewed sense of purpose, her heart steadying against the pulse of possibility, knowing that what lay ahead could change more than her day, more than her life, as the unseen forces now quietly acknowledged the ripple she had created, leaving her suspended between the mundane and the remarkable, poised on the edge of something truly transformative. Chloe Johnson leaned against the counter, the soft hum of the diner around her fading into a background blur as her thoughts continued to whirl around the unexpected turn of events from that morning. The letter still rested in her bag, edges peeking out like a secret waiting to be revealed, and she could not help but run her fingers along the smooth paper, tracing the elegant handwriting that conveyed gratitude, acknowledgement, and a sense of connection far beyond her own understanding. Outside, the streets of the neighborhood bustled with the familiar rhythm of daily life, the chatter of pedestrians and the occasional honk of a car horn blending into a comforting, ordinary soundtrack that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary moment she had just experienced. Chloe took a deep breath, allowing the cool air to drift in through the open diner door, the scent of fresh coffee and frying bacon grounding her even as her mind raced with possibilities. Her eyes fell on the window, watching the sunlight glint off the metal of a passing car, imagining the motorcade that had stopped outside her apartment earlier, the polished vehicles, the precise movements of the men in suits, and the sudden, quiet acknowledgement of her actions that had rippled out into the world. She could feel the subtle weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a gentle reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could carry power beyond comprehension. Chloe glanced at the boy from the alley again, his figure now distant but unmistakable, running with a boundless energy that reflected the simple joy of being fed, being seen, and being acknowledged, and she felt a quiet pride in knowing that she had played a part in that moment of human connection. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the worn tiles of the diner floor, illuminating Chloe's thoughtful expression as she traced the contours of the counter with her hand, the rough texture grounding her while her imagination wandered through the implications of the morning's events. She considered the unseen threads connecting her, the boy, and the motorcade, each action creating a ripple, each choice subtly shaping outcomes she could not yet measure. The city seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, the distant sounds of life blending with the silence of anticipation that hung in the air, and she realized that her simple gesture had opened a doorway to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Chloe straightened, the hum of the diner now blending seamlessly with the rhythm of her own resolve, and she allowed herself a small smile, the kind that comes from recognizing the impact of one thoughtful action. Her mind drifted to the questions of what might come next, who would reach out, what opportunities might unfold, and she felt a quiet thrill in the uncertainty, the thrill of potential, and the knowledge that she had already begun a chain of events that could touch lives far beyond her own. The sunlight fell across her shoulders as she stood, casting a soft glow, and for the first time that day, Chloe felt the gentle pull of hope, the recognition that her choices, however small, had begun to shape a story much larger than herself, leaving her poised, ready, and quietly exhilarated by the unfolding of what was yet to come. Chloe Johnson walked out of the diner as the morning sun climbed higher, painting the city streets with golden light that reflected off windows and asphalt alike, and she could feel the subtle pull of curiosity and anticipation guiding her steps as she made her way down the sidewalk, the envelope now tucked safely under her arm. The sounds of the city filled the air, a mixture of distant sirens, car horns, and the chatter of pedestrians crossing intersections, blending into a rhythmic backdrop that contrasted sharply with the quiet intensity building inside her chest. She glanced down a side street where the alley met the larger avenue and caught a glimpse of the boy she had helped earlier, crouched beside a stack of newspapers, flipping through the pages with an absorbed expression, and she felt a warm swell of connection, understanding that the smallest gesture had reached farther than she could have imagined. As she passed a row of old brick buildings with cracked facades and rusted fire escapes, Chloe noticed the sunlight glinting on a polished black limousine parked just around the corner, its engine silent, its presence commanding attention despite the ordinary surroundings, and she realized that the man who had delivered the envelope earlier was likely waiting, quietly observing, assessing. Her steps slowed instinctively, each one deliberate, as the realization that she was now part of a larger story settled over her like a weightless blanket. She paused at the edge of the curb, the heat from the morning sun radiating off the pavement, and let her eyes scan the street, taking in every detail. The subtle reflections off car windows, the slight rustle of leaves in a nearby tree, the distant wail of a train horn across the tracks, all of it anchoring her in the present while her mind spun through the possibilities of what was to come. A soft breeze lifted the hem of her faded hoodie, and Chloe adjusted her grip on the envelope, feeling the smooth edges under her fingertips, the weight of responsibility and anticipation pressing gently but persistently. She stepped forward again, her sneakers making soft contact with the concrete, and approached the parked limousine, her gaze fixed on the door as it opened slowly, revealing the man from the motorcade with a neutral expression, yet eyes that reflected recognition and appreciation, the kind that carried a quiet authority without intimidation. He extended his hand slightly toward her, a subtle invitation, and Chloe, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, moved closer, feeling the tension in the air shift from uncertainty to expectation. The sunlight glinted off the metal of his wristwatch and the polished shoes at his feet, details that seemed exaggerated against the worn pavement, emphasizing the contrast between her world and the one she had momentarily touched through her small act of kindness. The boy from the alley peeked out from behind a corner, a silent witness, his expression a mixture of awe and delight, and Chloe felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her choice had created a ripple of consequence far beyond her imagination. As she finally reached the limousine, the man handed her another envelope, thinner this time, with her name written neatly in cursive, and Chloe understood without words that she was being invited into a story that could transform not just her day, but the trajectory of what was possible. The city around her fading into a muted backdrop, while the sense of purpose and potential expanded within, leaving her standing on the edge of discovery, anticipation, and quiet exhilaration as the morning light warmed her face, and the hum of the city reminded her that extraordinary moments could emerge from the simplest acts of kindness. Chloe Johnson hesitated for a moment at the open door of the limousine, the morning sunlight reflecting off the sleek black paint and catching the edges of the envelopes she carried, and she could feel the gentle pull of expectation guiding her forward as the man in the suit gestured for her to step inside. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the flutter of excitement and nerves, and slid into the back seat, the leather cool and firm beneath her, the city rushing past the tinted windows in a blur of colors and shapes. The envelope from earlier rested on her lap, its contents a quiet reminder of the act that had set all of this in motion, and she traced the smooth paper with her fingertips, feeling the subtle weight and texture as if it contained not just words, but a measure of possibility. The man seated across from her offered a calm, reassuring smile, his eyes reflecting a mix of recognition and curiosity, and Chloe understood without needing explanation that her morning choices had led her to a moment of opportunity that was rare and fragile. The hum of the limousine's engine filled the space, steady and low, punctuated by the occasional shift of the seats or the soft click of the seatbelt latch, and Chloe allowed herself to observe every detail, from the gleam of sunlight on polished metal to the muted reflections of passing buildings, letting the sensory tapestry ground her while her mind considered what might come next. Outside the tinted glass, the streets of the neighborhood stretched endlessly, familiar yet suddenly extraordinary, each sign and corner imbued with the quiet tension of anticipation, and Chloe felt a thrilling combination of wonder and resolve as she realized that the ripple from a single act of kindness had reached further than she had imagined. The boy from the alley flashed through her thoughts, his wide eyes and trusting smile a quiet anchor that reminded her of the human connection at the heart of all this, and she pressed the envelope closer, feeling the warmth of possibility radiating through the folds of paper. The limousine turned smoothly onto a larger avenue, the cityscape opening into sunlight and distant rooftops, and Chloe felt herself suspended between ordinary and extraordinary, each second stretching and contracting as the vehicle carried her forward, the hum of tires on pavement like a steady heartbeat syncing with her own. The man across from her adjusted his posture slightly, glancing down at the envelope and then back at her, a subtle gesture that conveyed both patience and a quiet insistence that she be ready for what was next. Chloe exhaled slowly, the morning breeze through the partially open window brushing against her cheek, and she allowed herself a moment to absorb the enormity of the journey she had begun with nothing more than a simple choice to give. The city passed in a stream of muted sounds and shimmering light, and for the first time, Chloe felt the invisible threads of her actions tangibly pulling at the edges of possibility, connecting her, the boy, and the unseen forces that now recognized the importance of her courage, leaving her poised on the cusp of discovery, her heart steady, and her mind alert to the unfolding story just ahead. Chloe Johnson settled into the limousine's seat as the cityscape blurred past, sunlight streaming through the tinted windows and catching the edges of her hair in warm highlights. The weight of the envelope in her lap, a tangible reminder of the journey she had begun with nothing more than a simple gesture of kindness. She traced the edges of the paper with her fingers, the smooth texture grounding her as she considered the ripple effect of her actions. The boy from the alley, the man in the suit, and the motorcade now forming an intricate web that extended far beyond her immediate understanding. The subtle hum of the engine blended with the distant sounds of the city, car horns, chatter, and the occasional screech of a bicycle, creating a rhythm that mirrored her quickening heartbeat, each beat filled with anticipation and wonder at what lay ahead. Chloe shifted slightly, the leather seat cool beneath her palms, and allowed her eyes to wander across the interior of the limousine, taking in the meticulous order, the polished surfaces, The faint scent of leather mingled with a hint of citrus from the air freshener, details that felt foreign yet strangely grounding. She imagined the boy receiving the bread that morning, his wide eyes and tentative smile replaying in her mind, a quiet anchor that reminded her why she had chosen to act without hesitation. And she felt the warmth of that memory extend into the present, a gentle pulse of courage and hope. The man across from her observed silently, his posture relaxed but attentive, a subtle nod acknowledging the connection she had forged through her simple act, and Chloe felt a growing confidence, a sense that she was being seen not just for what she had done, but for who she was, her integrity and heart recognized without fanfare. The limousine turned onto a wider avenue, sunlight glinting off the windows of passing buildings, the streets filled with motion and life, and Chloe felt herself suspended between the ordinary and extraordinary, the familiar city suddenly alive with possibility and promise. Her thoughts drifted to the ripple effects of kindness, the unseen consequences that could reshape events and touch lives in ways she could not yet measure, and she understood that this journey was not just about recognition, but about the unfolding of potential, the quiet power of human connection extending beyond the immediate moment. She glanced once more out the window, the boy waving from a distance, a fleeting smile on his face, and felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that her choice had created something larger than herself, a bridge between worlds previously disconnected. The sunlight shifted, shadows stretching across the limousine interior, and Chloe exhaled slowly, letting the anticipation settle into a quiet focus, her mind alert and open to the unfolding story. The hum of the engine beneath her a constant reminder that each moment now carried weight, that each second brought her closer to the realization of the extraordinary impact of her simple, courageous act, leaving her poised at the threshold of discovery and quiet exhilaration. Chloe Johnson felt a gentle shift in the atmosphere as the limousine slowed near a building with glass doors that reflected the morning sun in sharp, dazzling lines, and she could sense the gravity of the moment settle in her chest, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and cautious anticipation intertwining with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The man in the suit opened the door for her, the soft click of the hinges and the subtle hiss of the hydraulic system marking the entrance into a world far different from her familiar streets, polished floors, and the faint scent of leather and citrus greeting her senses as she stepped forward. Chloe's eyes swept across the lobby, the sunlight streaming through the high windows illuminating the sleek marble floors, the geometric patterns of light and shadow creating a sense of motion frozen in time, and she could feel the quiet power of the space pressing gently yet insistently against her awareness. She adjusted the envelope in her hands, fingertips brushing the edges of the smooth paper as she moved, and each step echoed slightly, a soft percussion that seemed to mark the unfolding of a story much larger than the one she had anticipated that morning in the alley. The boy from earlier appeared again in her mind, his small smile and trusting gaze anchoring her thoughts, reminding her that even the simplest acts could create consequences of extraordinary reach, and that the path she now walked had begun with nothing more than a choice guided by kindness and instinct. The man from the limousine gestured for her to sit at a polished conference table, the cool surface gleaming in the sunlight and reflecting fragments of her own face back at her in unexpected ways. And Chloe felt the quiet weight of expectation pressing gently yet insistently against her shoulders, a reminder that she had entered a space where observation, attention, and consideration held power equal to words and actions. She took her seat, smoothing the folds of her hoodie against her lap, feeling the contrast between the softness of her clothing and the firm, unyielding surface beneath her hands, and allowed herself a moment to breathe, her gaze traveling to the subtle patterns of the floor, the precise alignment of chairs, the gentle sway of the curtains in the draft from the large glass doors. Outside, sunlight glinted off passing windows, casting fleeting shapes into the lobby that danced across walls and floors like quiet signals of anticipation, and Chloe could feel her pulse synchronize with the rhythm of the space, each second stretching and contracting with a gentle insistence that she attend fully to the unfolding moment. She reached into her bag and lightly traced the envelope again, feeling the texture, the weight, the the silent promise of opportunity and recognition that had carried her from a quiet alley into a place brimming with presence. And a subtle thrill coursed through her, quiet but insistent, as she realized that the choices she had made, the courage she had exercised, had set in motion a sequence of events that could touch lives far beyond her own awareness. The man across from her remained silent, his gaze steady and attentive, conveying acknowledgement without words, and Chloe allowed herself to absorb the gravity and possibility of the moment, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths, fully present as the world outside hummed quietly. The sunlight spilling over her shoulders and illuminating the first tangible sense of the extraordinary that had begun to ripple outward from a simple act of generosity. Chloe Johnson's hands trembled slightly as she carefully unfolded the letter on the conference table, sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows and casting intricate patterns of light across the polished surface, highlighting the crisp edges of the envelope and the smooth texture of the paper. She traced the elegant handwriting with her fingers, absorbing the words of acknowledgement and gratitude that spoke directly to the quiet courage she had shown earlier. In the morning, the simplicity of giving her last piece of bread now transformed into a ripple of consequence that extended far beyond her neighborhood. The man across from her remained silent, his gaze calm yet attentive, and Chloe felt a subtle shift in the air, a recognition of integrity and kindness that did not need explanation, the kind that could be felt deeply without words. Outside, the city pulsed with life, distant car horns, murmurs of pedestrians, and the occasional wail of a siren forming a steady rhythm that blended with the low hum of the building's ventilation, a reminder that the world continued to move even as extraordinary events unfolded within these walls. Chloe's eyes flickered to the faint reflection of her own face in the window pane, sunlight highlighting the determination in her expression, and she felt the gravity of the moment settle in her chest, a mix of anticipation, humility, and wonder. She glanced down at the envelope once more, realizing that within its pages lay not only words of thanks, but also the opening of a door to possibilities she had never dared to imagine, opportunities that acknowledged the smallest acts of humanity and elevated them into tangible outcomes. The boy from the alley reappeared in her thoughts, his bright eyes and tentative smile anchoring her reflections and reminding her that this moment, as extraordinary as it seemed, had its roots in the quiet, human act of giving without expectation, a connection that had silently guided the unfolding chain of events. Chloe leaned forward slightly, inhaling deeply, the faint scent of polished wood and paper mingling with the warm sunlight, and allowed herself to absorb the enormity of what had been set into motion, each detail of the room. The subtle alignment of chairs, the glint of light on the table, the soft hum of distant traffic, becoming a backdrop for the profound acknowledgement of her presence and action. The man across from her adjusted his posture, a slight nod conveying both patience and reassurance, and Chloe recognized the unspoken communication, a bridge between gratitude and responsibility, opportunity and recognition, quietly affirming that her courage had not gone unnoticed. She smoothed the folds of her hoodie, feeling the contrast between its worn fabric and the pristine surface of the table, and let a small, controlled exhale pass through her, steadying the flutter in her chest. Outside, sunlight bounced off the reflective surfaces of nearby buildings, creating fleeting patterns that danced across the room, and Chloe felt a quiet thrill of anticipation, understanding that her day, her morning, her choices had transformed into a moment of significance that extended far beyond herself, a ripple of kindness acknowledged, and a story ready to unfold in ways she could only begin to imagine, leaving her poised on the threshold of discovery, humility, and the extraordinary. Chloe Johnson sat back in her chair, the sunlight now spilling fully across the polished table and casting warm streaks over the envelope that still lay before her, and she allowed herself a moment to absorb the weight of what had unfolded, the quiet recognition of her actions settling like a soft pulse in her chest. The man across from her leaned slightly forward, hands folded, eyes reflecting a mixture of respect, curiosity, and unspoken admiration, and Chloe felt the gravity of the situation deepen as the implications became clearer, a ripple that extended far beyond her initial act of giving. The room seemed to hold its breath, the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant city noise creating a suspended space where time itself felt elongated, allowing every thought, gesture, and glance to carry amplified significance. Chloe's fingers rested lightly on the envelope, tracing the edges again, the texture a comforting anchor in the midst of rising anticipation, and her mind wandered to the boy in the alley, the small smile and wide eyes that had first sparked this chain of events, a memory that now seemed both intimate and profound in its reach. The man across from her finally spoke, his voice calm and deliberate, detailing the effects her simple act had triggered, the ways in which her kindness had intersected with other lives, creating outcomes that would not have been possible otherwise. And Chloe listened, a soft shiver of realization traveling down her spine as the scale of the consequences became apparent. Outside, the city pulsed with familiar rhythms, footsteps, traffic, and distant voices. But inside, the room felt suspended, each sound muted beneath the significance of this moment, a quiet stage upon which Chloe's courage had transformed into something tangible and unexpectedly influential. She shifted slightly, absorbing the details of the space around her, the subtle gleam of sunlight across the floor, the precise alignment of the chairs, the way shadows fell across the walls, each element reinforcing the sense that she had entered a place where ordinary and extraordinary met quietly, yet unmistakably. Chloe's heartbeat settled into a steady rhythm as she processed the words, the acknowledgement, and the recognition that she had, without planning, influenced outcomes far beyond her neighborhood, her morning, her small choices, and she felt a growing sense of confidence, humility, and quiet pride, a realization that integrity and kindness could reverberate with power that was unseen but deeply felt. She glanced at the envelope one final time, knowing it symbolized far more than words on paper, a tangible manifestation of the unseen ripples she had initiated, and a thrill of anticipation coursed through her as she imagined the unfolding possibilities, the potential for connection, change, and impact. Chloe exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting to the sunlit windows, the city outside a soft blur of motion and life, and she felt a profound stillness within, a quiet understanding that this moment, this recognition, and the unfolding story were proof that courage and compassion, no matter how small at the start, could ripple outward to transform worlds in ways unimaginable, leaving her poised at the edge of discovery, aware of the extraordinary influence of a single, selfless act. Chloe Johnson felt a quiet swell of anticipation as she left the polished conference room, the sunlight streaming through the large glass windows and illuminating her path. The envelope safely tucked under her arm, a symbol of the journey that had begun with a single, simple act. Each step down the marble floors echoed softly, the sound blending with the distant hum of the city outside, the chatter of pedestrians and the gentle rolling of tires against the pavement, creating a rhythm that seemed to match the quiet excitement building in her chest. She paused briefly at the exit, glancing back at the space she had just left, absorbing the gravity and significance of the events, the acknowledgement and recognition she had received settling gently, like a warm weight across her shoulders. Outside, the sun cast a bright glow on the street, highlighting the reflective surfaces of nearby windows and the polished black SUVs parked just beyond the curb, their presence a subtle reminder of the ripple her kindness had created and the extraordinary circumstances it had set in motion. Chloe inhaled deeply, the cool morning air filling her lungs, carrying with it the scents of the city, freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, exhaust from passing cars, the faint metallic tang of the streets, and allowed herself a moment to stand still, absorbing each detail with a growing sense of clarity and purpose. Her gaze drifted to the boy from the alley, who waved at her from a distance, his small smile a reminder of the connection that had initiated this chain of events, and Chloe felt a soft warmth rise in her chest, the simple act of giving now fully intertwined with the unexpected outcomes that had followed. She began walking toward the edge of the street, her steps measured and deliberate, taking in the details around her, the sunlight catching the edges of the envelopes, the gleam on the polished shoes of the men standing nearby, the gentle sway of trees in the soft breeze, all elements contributing to the sense that this moment held more than she could yet comprehend. Chloe's thoughts wandered to the possibilities that lay ahead, the doors that might open, and the lives that could be touched by the small, selfless choice she had made. The gravity of potential settling over her in a way that was both thrilling and humbling. She adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the smooth paper of the envelope against her fingertips, and allowed herself a quiet exhale, a soft acknowledgement of her own courage and the extraordinary power of a simple, kind action. The city moved around her, ordinary yet charged with the subtle promise of change, each pedestrian and vehicle a background chorus to the unfolding story, and Chloe felt a renewed sense of resolve, her heart steadying, aware that she had stepped into a narrative that extended beyond herself. As she approached the familiar streets of her neighborhood, the sunlight warmed her face, the distant hum of traffic blending with the echo of the boy's smile, and she felt a quiet certainty that her act of kindness, though small, had set into motion a series of events that would continue to unfold, leaving an enduring impact on lives far beyond her own, a testament to the power of compassion, integrity, and the quiet courage of a single choice. Chloe Johnson stepped onto the quiet sidewalk, the late afternoon sun casting long golden streaks across the pavement, warming her face and highlighting the faint traces of sweat from the morning's excitement. She held the envelope gently, the edges softened by her careful handling, and allowed herself a deep breath, letting the city's sounds, the distant hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the occasional bark of a dog, wash over her in a steady, grounding rhythm. Her gaze drifted to the familiar brick buildings of her neighborhood, the uneven pavement and small patches of green peeking through cracks, and she felt a quiet pride, a recognition that her small act of giving had grown into something larger, a subtle transformation that she could feel reverberating outward. The boy from the alley ran past once again, glancing at her with a bright smile and a quick wave, and Chloe responded with a gentle nod. The connection between them unspoken but deeply understood, a reminder that the ripples she had created were not bound by words but by trust and attention. The envelope in her hand contained more than acknowledgement. It was a symbol of opportunity, of recognition, and of the unseen power of human kindness to influence events beyond immediate perception. Chloe's heart beat steadily, her thoughts wandering to the man in the limousine, the careful precision of his movements, the respect in his eyes, and she realized that she had been part of a chain of actions that linked strangers in unexpected ways, a testament to the quiet strength of integrity and empathy. She allowed her gaze to rise, taking in the expanse of the street, the sunlight glinting off the edges of nearby windows, the shadows of passing trees stretching across the pavement, and she felt a profound sense of anticipation, a gentle thrill in knowing that her morning choices had set into motion events that could continue to unfold far beyond her own awareness. The wind stirred lightly, brushing against her hoodie, carrying with it the faint scent of baked bread and city streets, and Chloe felt anchored, present in the moment, while simultaneously aware of the possibilities that awaited, doors opening quietly through the acknowledgement of her simple act. She walked slowly, each step measured and deliberate, observing the details around her, the gleam of sunlight on metal surfaces, the subtle shifts of light through leaves, the distant reflections on glass windows, and each observation deepened her awareness of how ordinary life and extraordinary opportunity could intertwine in quiet, unexpected ways. Chloe adjusted the envelope in her hands, fingers grazing the smooth paper, and allowed herself to smile, the weight in her chest lightened by the knowledge that compassion had its own currency, invisible yet undeniably powerful. She continued down the street, the afternoon sun warming her back, feeling the city unfold around her like a stage set for potential, every corner and pedestrian a witness to the subtle power of one act performed with sincerity and courage, leaving her poised between the familiar rhythm of her neighborhood and the extraordinary realization that she had, through simple generosity, begun to alter the course of more than just her own day, creating a quiet legacy that would echo in ways she had only just begun to imagine, her footsteps soft but resolute on the pavement, carrying her forward into the unfolding story that kindness had begun.